So today we're joined by Shavon Garcia. Shavon has been on the steering committee for a number of years. I don't remember exactly how many. I'm saying like 3, 4.
This is just my second.
Oh, sorry. It seems like it's been longer than that. Well, she's been such a great contribution. And if you know Shavon's work, then you know something about her performers. You know, they're incredible mood setters, but also the thing that strikes me, especially early in the season, that's worthy of the conversation is how calm and confident they are. And they're always operating in high-risk situations over a long period of time of pretty big skills being connected in challenging ways. And I know that there's got to be some type of mental study that ultimately creates that ability. That in and of itself I consider it a skill set. And we've certainly dealt with performers in our individual groups that would ultimately freak themselves out, have their little panic moments, and then it spreads like wildfire through the group, and it just becomes this horrible performance virus. So I really thought it was important for you to kind of enlighten us, Shavon. So today we're hoping that you're going to talk a little bit about how you achieve that with those performers. Can we do that?
Yes, definitely.
What do you do? Help me understand how you set all of that up.
I think if anything, to me, the most important thing is trying to set up a consistency in the approach to how we enter a show, how we view a show, how we prepare for a show. It's really difficult, and something I always tell my performers is you will feel different in a show situation, whether adrenaline kicks in, nerves, audience energy, whatever it is, or energy, lack of energy that you might have been expecting from an audience. There are so many variables, and it will always feel different. So the closer we can get in a rehearsal situation, the closest we can get to prepare for that is key, and just really staying true and consistent to that. Yeah, we have so many kind of practices that we use. Early season, we're so focused on putting the components together and getting the show done. And so it's hard to switch gears as we get closer to the shows, but it's really, really important. And for me, I have to let myself go too and just say, we have to be working on larger chunks. We have to be working on what it's going to be like to be in a show setting, because we want to so badly break things down and make things perfect. But that's at some point doesn't do the performers justice in the preparation area, because that's not what they're going to do for their 6 minutes. They're going to get out there and they need a certain amount of endurance to do that and a certain amount of confidence with those big reps.
I love how you acknowledge the fact that the performance itself is different, because it's kind of the dirty little secret. We always push, no, practice like you perform, practice like you perform. But I like that you kind of out the fact that it is just simply different. And as a performer who, we talk about the horse races, their job is to run. And those performers, their job is to perform. And without that setting, no matter how well rehearsed they are, there's still a component that's missing. And I love that you give them that information as kind of part of their prep for that. I think that's awesome. And I really like how you talk in rehearsals and shift those rehearsals. You also acknowledge that early season versus late season, especially early part of those performances, your tendency is to want to clean to get all of those achievement points. But so much of that early season achievement is also built in the impression, if not the reality, of confidence in those performers. And I just love how you highlighted that. So tell me how you shift those rehearsals then to accommodate those longer sections and things like that as you get closer to shows.
Yeah, as I mentioned, it is difficult, but we have to kind of push towards a more production runs, and at least schedule time for that, so that the hours don't get away from us and we're just bogged down on the details. Yeah. Then as we get really closer to shows, we like to go through the whole process sometimes. Like if it's a regional that we're preparing for, we'll start all the way back at the warm-up room, and we'll kind of mimic what the warm-up room is. I give them the time that they have. And actually in rehearsal, I give them a little less time than the warm-up room, just so if anything goes wrong, if we have 10 minutes to warm up, I give them 8. And also in the show warm-up room, it feels so much faster for them. It feels like it flies by. So I'm just kind of trying to prepare them for that. Then I make sure that they are not spinning or taking anything between that time and the show time, so they don't get dependent on, oh, I gotta take this toss one more time. You take it, you put it down, you got it, great, move on. Even if it's over or under, you know that, and you're good enough to fix that. You've practiced this for hours. So kind of building that confidence in their mentality. Then we do everything, the walk on. I time them walking on, getting off the floor, just so there are no surprises. As you know, you can look on WGI and see what the timing lines are and the directions and the doors and all of that, which is great. And then it's kind of good so that they are processing after their run through, they're processing the whole thing, the whole experience of being at that show instead of just the 6 minutes.
Sure.
And of course, things happen, but within that process sometimes, but the closer you can get them to being prepared is just key, I think.
Yeah, having a baseline. That sounds really smart. Hey, I see so many people go before they go into the door, they're hanging onto their equipment for almost an entire interval where they're just holding it in a pile. I mean, I always worry about, how the muscles tighten up and how it shifts the
Yeah.
physicality of the being. What do you tell me about those moments before, when you're in the hall and holding equipment and waiting that interval? What do you like to do? And is it, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up because that's also in my notes. Whatever rituals you do, or the chants or breathing or little speeches, put those into rehearsal too. So they're not hearing those or experiencing those for the first time. Also in rehearsal, it helps them get those kind of nerves or those butterflies so they're closer to a performance situation. That's interesting question because I kind of go off of my team and what it seems like they need either in that moment. Of course, I try to be consistent with it, but each team is different each season. So some of them need me to guide them more in that hallway, or
Yeah.
that I kind of just keep talking to them and tell them to move around. I do have them always put their equipment down, yes, if it's more than just a minute or two. Sometimes I need to guide them and I feel like they need to hear my voice kind of keep chiming in and keeping them grounded. And then sometimes I feel like I can feel their energy and they're like, they've got this and they kind of know what to do for themselves and they're moving around. They're relaxed, but not too relaxed, those kind of things. So trying to teach them because every performer is also different. And some like to, go into that space and some like to chit chat a little bit. So I try not to dictate too much, but it definitely varies for me from team to team and performer to performer or even show to show.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to have that consistent person reading that all the time or being that voice if needed and when needed. And then, so I kind of just let them relax for the most part and then breathe with them before they go on. Sometimes I'll make that a little longer if I feel like they need to be more connected to what we're, focusing on.
I think the key is being there and reading them, reading the room, and really understanding and being sensitive to what
Mm-hmm.
you're seeing and how it ultimately impacts and being able to bring the room back. And so many people have a ton of staff, so many people just have one or two. And I was alpha in the time I taught, and especially my younger years, man, it like you're right. I want you to count in your head, but I want it to be my voice, not yours. I want you to think too, hear me, and that way there's a little safety and comfort, the whole daddy issue. But
Yeah.
eventually, I moved away from that. Do you find that do you have the same person, or can you kind of pass that baton off to trusted staff people, or do you still like to be that person before they go in?
I still love to be that person, but I absolutely have staff members or even leaders in the color guard that could take on that role if needed, or if I need to step away or handle something else. And that certainly has happened. And I feel the same as you. I think that over my years of teaching, I've gone from this needs to happen, and I need to be this voice, and I need to me letting go a little bit and saying, they got this right now. I don't need to push this. I don't need to overstress them out by them feeling like I got to be in your head right now.
Yeah,
I've definitely
right.
kind of relaxed on that, and it's more of a give and take now. And as you said, reading the room and kind of reading what they need or don't need.
I
Sometimes
think
they
that's an
don't need.
indicator. That's an indicator of the time that you've spent to build that ability. I think that is also an achievement. That's an indicator of the years and years and years of experience and you being able to adjust, adapt, evolve in real time. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, so you talked about individuals having kind of different reactions. Do you create like individual plans for them, like during their off time or when they're rehearsing on their own?
Yes, definitely when they're rehearsing on their own, we try to talk to the performers about, I know it sounds cheesy and elementary, but always imagining someone's watching you is, the cliche thing, but it really is different. And some performers have to imagine thousands of people. Some just have to imagine one or two that make them feel like, they need to impress them. It's different for everyone, but trying to get them in that mentality. A lot of, if my performers are older, so they can perform run-throughs in front of their students at the end of a rehearsal. For younger performers like A-Guard, maybe if there's time in rehearsal to do small group performances, or performing doing a run-through in front of friends or family at home. It just
Yeah,
changes the energy and reminds them like there's a different feeling when I'm doing this outside of rehearsal just with my staff. And then just starting to change their process as well to those larger rehearsal chunks of do the run through and assess the mistakes after instead of stopping every time you have a mistake and kind of getting out of that habit, because as we know, we don't have that luxury during the
yeah,
actual performance time. For younger performers too, I like to talk about just playing a little game with yourself and being in character all the time when you arrive to a show, being that performance character that you want to be all the time, not just for the 6 minutes you walk in, because it's
yeah,
hard sometimes to make that transition. For younger performers too, I'll in dance class we'll do across the floors, and it will just be walking. Show me how you'll enter the gym. Show me how you'll enter the space and what kind of things are going through your head. You are able to look around. You're not a robot. You're not getting nerves. You're kind of changing the energy as you
yeah.
enter. Just playing little games like that, I think helps a lot of younger performers individually access, and allowing them to ask questions about it to the staff or older performers, I think is really key to just keep having those conversations.
That's great. Disney, when he was working on the parks, his big mantra was never let them see backstage. And in our activity, we kind of carry backstage around with us a lot, except for those, 6, 7 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how you've kind of addressed that, is that you do have an impression. People, even in a pedestrian setting, have an impression of who the color guard is. And,
Yeah.
not that it has to be in character, if you will, that you're walking around
Right.
angry and being a lion or whatever, although that is certainly an option also.
Mm-hmm.
But that there's a sense of professionalism in being present and being part of the community. Even in some of the overviews, we talking about how kids sit in the stands and watch other color guards and stuff. Hey, one of
Yeah.
the things that, when I think of your color guards, um, and again, they're calm, but you also, what I think is kind of part of your writing style and also ultimately your performance style, is they feel like it's effortless. You always assume that these that these
Mm-hmm.
performers have everything they need to be able to do everything that's being asked of them, and that's a great competitive strategy because it manifests in the numbers also. But there's also kind of this, it's like Carol sometimes, she talks about the intellectualization of an emotional response, you
Mm-hmm.
know, do you give them tools for how to, I'm going to go back just for a second,
Okay.
effortless versus without care? Because so many times when you see people work to be effortless, they look like they don't care. And yet
Mm-hmm.
your performers feel so crazy focused and so crazy into what it is they do. You can tell they're geeky about what they do. And so it doesn't get this kind of lazy, physical, lazy, emotional laziness that you see when you see a lot of people work to be effortless.
Yes.
Um, Talk to me about that line and how you do that, because you're kind of really good at that.
Yes, in our rehearsals, we talk about thoughtfulness versus carefulness. So we
Mm,
don't ever want to have a careful or timid approach to what we do, but we have to be so thoughtful and so invested in what we do. Um, there's no room for error, and of course errors happen, which is another thing we should talk about, is telling your kids that it's probably not ever a perfect show, but these tools are preparing them to be able to recover, and the audience can feel like it's perfect.
yeah, right.
um, so just really that investment comes from us really having a philosophy. And again, I'm in a situation where I am with the performers. I do dance class. I'm sitting there during their equipment technique, and then I'm writing and like so I'm there just in their face. They can't get
Uh-huh.
enough of me. But it's a constant thing that we talk about in our philosophy, that is being present in the moment. And it's really, really difficult because we can be so stressed about what the mistake that we just made, or we're thinking about that 7 that's coming up, or the big flag toss that's coming up. And I feel like some of that, those moments where we come out of that thoughtfulness happen because we're thinking ahead or behind. So
Mm,
really getting them to invest in the present moment, and we do go as far as meditation. And I don't think everyone has that luxury, to meditate with their students, or maybe your students are young and you feel like they're not ready for something like that. But talking about just being able to be in that state, it's a meditative state when you are able to stay in that moment and in that process and what you're doing. And think of fulfilling count 6, 7, 8, and before 1 of the release of the toss. And when you can invest count by count in the same energy that you would in that 7, well, it takes the stress off the 7,
yeah,
and you're
right.
staying invested in what you're doing, and you get to just trust your technique on that toss instead of overshooting it or under second guessing it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's something that's really, really big for my performers in kind of achieving what you're talking about.
You have a really beautiful balance between micro and macro that I hope people are picking up on. It's not as though one is sacrificed for the other, but that there's a marriage between the two, and it's your strategic timing of when and what it is you talk about, when and how. I just think it's really brilliant. So, Shavon, this has been awesome. Do you have any other last minute things? We're coming to the end of our time.
Yes, my big thing is just uh, no matter who the performer is or how experienced they are, there will be nerves or emotions at some point,
Yeah.
and or I call it the second guessing voice. The second guessing voice will come in right before the performance at some time, and I always tell my performers the key is preparation. So if you feel prepared, and we as a staff have prepared you for everything that we can, and you've rehearsed this enough, you can breathe those voices away really easy.
Yeah. Trust
So
the training.
yeah, so I think all of this is preparation, and it's not about perfection, and just getting as close as we can to the ideal situation always is just so helpful.
So while I still have you on, I still
Yeah.
want to mine a little bit of gold because I know we have so many different types of units that view these.
Hmm.
Talk to me just real quickly.
Yes.
Tell me, do you distinguish between the classes? Is it a point of view or a point of development that kind of impacts your choices when you're dealing with younger performers versus, your monsters that you've created over many, many years?
It's really the same for me. It just depends on what they might be ready for. If I'm working with an A guard, they might not be ready for the meditation mumbo jumbo. But so we just would try to make their rehearsals as consistent as possible. We talked to them about the same ideas, and like I mentioned, the across the floor thing and just getting them into character. Same on and off practice situation, and for them even it's more important, I think, for consistency. And so you
Yeah,
might not have the time, or they might not be ready for some of the more existential stuff that we might talk about, but to me it's very, very important to keep the same consistency at a way that they can understand and operate, that feels good to them. No matter what, when they're at a show and they are nervous and we start doing the same things that we always do, and we're just sticking to the same thing that we always do, it's just a breath of relaxation for them.
sure. I love that you're hardwiring that into like every bit of their performance as opposed to layering it on later like it was a piece of veneer or anything. That sounds so smart.
Yes, it's difficult, so much more difficult to do it later.
Yeah. All right, Siobhan, I really appreciate your time. I can't wait to see all of the projects, and everybody's going to have such a good year. And I know that people are going to get so much from your information that you delivered us today. Thank you so much, Siobhan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was fun.
All right. Bye, guys. Break a leg.